Well, welcome to Student Affairs Live. Hello, and my name is Keith Edwards. This is Student Affairs Live, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a speaker, consultant, and coach who works to help individuals, organizations, and communities realize their fullest potential. You can find more about me at keithedwards.com. Today's live broadcast, we're debunking the myth of job fit and higher education in student affairs. This episode of Student Affairs Live is a part of the HigherEdLive network. All of our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education like we have with us here today. Be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the hashtag HigherEdLive. Thanks to Brian Proffer for tweeting at HigherEdLive and monitoring today's back channel. If you have questions for our panelists, please tweet hashtag HigherEdLive and we'll do our best to incorporate them into today's discussion. We broadcast HigherEdLive approximately twice each month on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Today's live broadcast is empowered by Platform Q Education's Conduit online engagement platform. Learn how to integrate continuous online engagement into your marketing and enrollment plans using Conduit. Visit platformqedu.com. All of our episodes are recorded. They're free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take HigherEdLive with you on the go by subscribing to our podcast. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. You know what you stand for. You feel it in your heart. Now what? Tune in to the free webinar, Making Your Mark, Unforgettable Branding, co-hosted by M. Stoner, a digital agency focused on higher education marketing and communications, and Zeno, a strategic branding and marketing firm for educational organizations. On Wednesday, June 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 Pacific, you'll learn how to transform your message platform into compelling and captivating creative and how to make your website an integral part of your branding. We're tweeting out a link with information and registration right now. Now, on to today's show. Today, we are debunking the myth of job fit with the co-editors of their new book, Debunking the Myth of Job Fit. Let's have each of our four panelists chime in. If you could tell us a little bit about who you are, your name, your pronouns, your role, and just a bit about yourselves, that would be great. I think we're going to start with Gabby.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. As Keith said, my name is Gabby Porcaro. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I currently serve as the Assistant Director for Queer and Trans Student Initiatives at Roger Williams University. So we're a smaller private university, liberal arts based in Bristol, Rhode Island, directly on the Narragansett Bay. We inhabit Indigenous land. And so that's a little bit about myself, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tran. I use he, him, and his pronouns. I am currently at Michigan State University as an assistant director of residence education. I have also previously served as the chair for ACPA's Commission for Social Justice Education. And then fun fact about myself, I am a huge soccer fan. I hope that folks are watching the Women's World Cup right now because it is lots of drama.
Hey everyone, my name is Elliott Devore and I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm currently a fourth-year PhD student in the counseling psychology program at the University of Go Vols. I also serve currently as a therapist at the Student Counseling Center in the role of a graduate assistant. Proud alumni of Iowa State and have worked in residence life.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Reece. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of Residential Life at Colgate University, which is a small residential liberal arts institution in central New York. I'm also a doctoral student in the Curriculum Instruction in the Science of Learning program at the University at Buffalo, and began as the chair of the Commission for Social Justice Education a few months ago.
Well, excellent. I'm really thankful that all four of you were able to be here. Now, you're co-editors of the book Debunking the Myth of Job Fit in Higher Education and Student Affairs. Brian, maybe you could tell us about how this all got started. Where did it emerge from? How did this project come to be? And I believe you have, in a comic book-oriented fashion, an origin story for us.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, because to me, this is one of the, I think, the most important parts about this book and the project. This really was born out of a collaboration and really started as a conversation through the Commission for Social Justice Education. I believe it was in 2014, which I think was Indianapolis. And at the convention, I actually happened not to be there at that particular convention, but I heard that there was a really great conversation amongst the members of the commission about some of the experiences that the members were having with feeling like they didn't fit in at work, and their experiences with the job search and feeling like they had to sort of hide parts of themselves. And when I learned about this conversation, I also felt a huge connection to that story. The chair of the commission at the time, I believe, was Stephanie Bondi, and she started to sort of organize this conversation with folks who wanted to continue talking about job fit with one another. And so I joined in on that conversation, and there were lots of other people there. I believe Vu and Elliott were part of that as well. And some folks like Reggie Blockett, Danielle Need from the Coalition for Sexual and Gender Identities, Stephanie, Dre Doming, were all some really great voices at that table. And over time, we started talking about whether or not this would make sense as a book. And none of us had really done a book project before, had ever really developed a book length project. And so for us, it felt a little bit aspirational. But over time, we continued the conversations, and a core group of people really got together to really continue talking about this. Gabby actually joined in as an intern with the Commission for Social Justice Education, which was a newer program at the time, and became so involved in the project that we ended up developing this, what I thought was a really stellar team of co-editors. Over time, we ended up putting out a call for chapters, and it's kind of your typical book process. And we asked people, what do they think about job fit? We received, I think, close to 50 submissions. Wow. For that call for chapters. So it was a really tough conversation that we had as a group about you can only have so many chapters in a book. And I think that what we ended up with is a really solid book. But to me, what that illustrates is that there are so many other perspectives about job fit out there that there just isn't room for print on, but that we also need to be paying attention to.
Well, and it tells me that this is something people are wrestling with, struggling with from so many different angles for so many different reasons. That's a huge response for a call for chapters from a book. Others want to share about how this all got started? Oh, Vu, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, we talked about this off air. I should unmute myself. Yeah, I would add on to the origin story by sharing that while the four of us had not had prior experience with creating a book project, the commission did have experience in publication, and so a part of our strength in scholarship came from a lot of folks who were involved in our first book project as a commission, which was the Art of Effective Facilitation. And so I know that for us, we also we modeled a lot of our process in developing the book project by drawing upon the infinite wisdom and scholarship from the folks involved with that book project.
Mm-hmm. Great. So tell us a little bit about who the contributors are and how this is organized for folks who don't have it in their hands.
Yeah, so we, as Brian was talking about the difficult selection process of all of the different chapters, we felt like it was really important to convey as much breadth as possible in terms of the varying perspectives on, critical perspectives on job fit. And so the chapters that we selected all really contribute additional critical layers in looking about job fit. And so anyone can pick up a book and go to a chapter that really speaks to them at that moment in time. And so maybe if there is, someone is experiencing some challenges with job fit and really needs or could benefit from more of a legal perspective or legal concepts around talking about job fit, you can turn to the chapter on legal perspectives on job fit. Or if someone could really use more perspectives on navigating job fit as a trans person, you can go to that chapter. So it's not necessarily a book that people would need to read front to back. You can read it at your own pace, and it really does, in some ways, it kind of acts as a reader. For those of you who have your hands on the book and have already started, we do recommend at the minimum reading the first chapter because it provides a really great overview of the general field of job fit scholarship. It includes a lot of work that we did on literature search and literature review from folks in many various fields outside of higher education who have done this work. And so would really recommend at least reading the first chapter and then going to the specific chapter in which you may find compelling. We also found we really aimed to strike a balance between making it accessible and not using a lot of jargon and language and big words to talk about job fit, while also making sure that it's engaging for folks who have been really interested in this topic for a long time. And so we hope that there's something for everybody in this book. Finally, I'll say that it includes a lot of different voices. And so we have folks who are scholars in the field. We have folks who are early career professionals. We have mid-level folks. It really does provide a wide range of perspectives on job fit.
Great. And I think we have a Brene Brown quote that can kind of help people get an idea about what you mean by fit and where you're critiquing fit, right?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. I think one of the challenging but exciting parts about this book for us is that we chose not to define fit. And we also were guided by a definition of fit at the same time. And so I'll share this quote, which is from Brene Brown in The Gifts of Imperfection. But she says, fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. And for us, this was sort of a guiding way of thinking about fit, but it wasn't necessarily a definition. And we found it really important to allow the contributing authors to define fit in a way that made sense for them based on their own experiences and backgrounds, the research that they have done, their work as supervisors or their experiences as supervisees, as people hiring, as people searching for jobs. So for us, this sort of general sense of fit as a way that we conform who we are to others' expectations and striving for belonging was something that really guided our work in writing the first chapter, but in seeking submissions for the rest of the book. But at the same time, it was really important to us to allow the space within the book for many different ways of conceptualizing fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'm a big Brene Brown fan, and we got that tweeted out. Thanks to Brian for tweeting that out from the HigherEdLive account. But I really appreciate that because there is something about where can I, and I've always used the language fit, and I appreciate you challenging that. Where can I maybe find belonging? Where maybe am I not going to find belonging? And what organizations and what people, and then for organizations, how do we create space where exactly as that quote says, people don't have to become something else. They get to fully be themselves, which is always a challenge. So,
yeah,
so thanks to.
I was just going to add too, one little piece of fun information is that we really struggled. We kind of made a challenge to ourselves to try not to use the word fit during our selection process, and as much as we couldn't use the word fit, we would try not to. It's very difficult. And so I would actually challenge the people listening to try to have a conversation where you're making decisions without using the word fit. And it's really hard because we use fit when we don't really know what else to say.
Yeah, and that gets us into trouble because that's where our unconscious and implicit biases just come flooding in, right? And you also can't hold me accountable. If I just say, well, they're not going to fit, you can't hold me accountable to what maybe is behind that. And I might not even be aware of what's behind that. Well, thank you so much to Brian and Vu for kind of setting us up and giving us the history of this. I'd love to bring Elliott and Gabby into this conversation. Elliott, let's begin with you. You all spent 5 years from these initial conversations at ACPA 2014 in Indianapolis to talking with other people in this project emerging and looking at 50-some responses and pulling this together and reading the author's work. I'd love to hear what you have learned about this topic and some of the takeaways that you've gained through the past 5 years of this project.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways for me in some of my area of interest in research and work is just around whiteness in general. I know a couple of us have talked about this chapter, but how that's helped me understand my own queerness and my own gender and the way I show up in the workplace. Now that I show up as a therapist has given me a lot of pause to assess how that influences my experience when I search for a job, when I interview for graduate programs. But I think one of the big takeaways for me now is, as a counseling psychologist now, which is a close relationship with student affairs folks, is vocational psychology is the big hub of our field, and I think a great contribution. I think student affairs in my training has helped me to better understand how we define fit with that person environment. I remember taking our class and really challenging the way we categorize people and even the way we've organized our data, the way it doesn't highlight the nuance in lived experience. So it's really helped me to challenge a lot of my colleagues and the work that we do with students, doing vocational assessments, the way we even structure that and the way we think about how that shows up has been really important for me. And I'm really thankful for the authors giving me a nuanced perspective to take in as a researcher now who's trying to create scholarship that helps people. It's given me pause to think more critically. So I'm appreciative of that.
Great. Gabby, how about you? What were some of your big lessons through this process?
So much in contributing to what's already been said and then so much outside of that. So I know Elliott was just talking about and mentioned in particular, one of our chapters explores how whiteness works. Last summer, I had the opportunity to attend the Social Justice Training Institute. So I think after coming off of getting to read that chapter, because the book was completed last summer, so I'd already spent quite a bit of time with that chapter, I just gained this new relationship to that chapter through that experience as well, particularly with how us white folks use the idea of perfectionism, like what it means to present in a certain manner, how it means to speak in a certain manner, our attire, things that maybe we talk about sometimes, but the way that we are always holding people to this idealistic and fake level of perfectionism, that's just a code for whiteness. That's been something that I've been reflecting on so much, and is one of my largest takeaways, and has spawned work that I'm doing on campus here with a few of my colleagues in having conversations surrounding our whiteness, right? So unpacking it, trying to understand it, holding each other accountable. A group of us are rereading White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo now this summer as a result of that, just really trying to make sure that we're doing better. Because I'm a part of our intercultural center. We had 2 job searches last year. I was pushing back against colleagues quite a bit as fit was showing up and trying to say, well, what personality types do we want? All of that coded language. Again, we discuss this throughout the book. Our authors do a fantastic job about interrogating this and providing you resources with how to push against this, whether you are on the hiring side or on the job seeker side. But all of those ways we try to create this ideal of perfect candidate is just kind of code for whiteness. And I would say capital W whiteness, like all of those other privileged identities. And then the other biggest piece that's really been a key takeaway for me, and one that's been a lot of fun, a chapter that you already referenced by Drs. David Wynn and Dr. LaWanda Ward, looking into the legal perspectives. I think they provide some excellent recommendations at the end of their chapter about what you as job seeker can be asking when you're on the interview, to ensure that you are putting yourself in an institution that is at least having tough conversations about what social identity even is, how it's showing up at the workplace, and what their commitment is to social justice. I think a key takeaway from that chapter and working with those authors for me was you don't have to be afraid to ask questions about what an institution's commitment is. And what you're going to find more likely than not is that institutions aren't doing their job, right? We're not investing in critical social justice thought the way we should be. And it might catch them off guard in an interview, but wouldn't you rather know that information up front before maybe you're given an offer and accept an offer?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective from both sides of this, as both being a candidate and what questions to ask and what things to seek, and then also sharing the challenges from the hiring side about what is our process looking like? Where are we slipping? Where are we falling into this? How do I hold myself accountable? How do I hold other members of the team accountable? Because my experience is we all want to be good at this, and then we don't do very well at this, right? The desire to do that, but then people sometimes just don't even know what to do. So I wonder if there are other suggestions you have for folks about some tangibles. We should give Kyle Ashley a shout out. We've got 2 mentions of his chapter and Kyle's chapter on whiteness. What other tips and suggestions would you have for folks from either the candidate or the hiring side? Any of you?
I would encourage you to look at how you've structured the interview day. I think the amount of time that you allocate to certain things really demonstrates what you're prioritizing as a workplace culture, and how are the identities represented in your organization contributing to the value placed in time allocation, where those events are. What does that say about you, and what doesn't it say about you? I think some of those things go unquestioned. So even just looking at those sorts of things has been helpful for me as we interview PhD students that fly across the country for our program. I've been asking some of those questions, and people, they would say, "Well, we've just always done it this way," and if that's the answer, then that's not a good one. So that comes to mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. From everything from what's in the posting to how we do it, to the handouts, to the PDFs, to the questions we ask, to how we schedule the interview day, we're always communicating things. And I think making sure that we're communicating accurately about the organization that we are, rather than the organization we wish we would be someday. It's good to have aspirations, but let's be honest with candidates about where things are not quite where we want to be.
I think I'll also add, I think one of the challenges for a topic like this and to write a book about this topic is it goes back a little bit to what Gabby was talking about in terms of perfectionism. And I think that there's so much potential for us as search committees or hiring managers to want to do it perfectly. But the problem is that we are operating within systems that are not perfect, and we're operating within systems that do privilege certain people over others. And so what I really appreciated about the way that the authors in this book, the way that they brought this topic to bear is through a really layered sense of awareness of those systems and structures, and how perfection isn't possible. So I'm thinking about the chapter on "No, I Can't Meet You for an $8 Coffee," and thinking about how so many of our practices are based in sort of classist notions of the ways in which we interact with one another. So one of the ways that people advance is by getting invited out to $8 coffees at Starbucks that they may not necessarily be able to afford. And I remember myself coming from a lower socioeconomic background and being in my first position out of grad school, not paying very well at all, and sort of this tension between needing to feeling like I needed to say yes to people inviting me out to lunch or inviting me out to coffee, but not knowing how to navigate, not being able to afford to do that. And so this isn't to say that we can't invite people out to lunch or we can't invite them out to coffee. And that's not what the authors are saying in that book. It's to really think about how we go about doing that and the ways in which what we do are caught up in those systems. And so, like, is it that I think about at my institution, if I want to take someone out for lunch or take them out for coffee, it's easy for me, but I'm at a privileged institution. It's easy for me to say, oh, I'll just put that on the budget code because what we're talking about is work related. But that's not the case at other institutions. And so really thinking through how do we help people advance or to think through their career trajectories in ways that aren't caught up in or perpetuating these systems.
Great. Well, I'd love to hear how you have put this wisdom gathered from these contributing authors into practice and how it has changed some of what you're doing. Vu, why don't we lead off with you? How have you put this into practice? You're at a large housing and residence life operation there at Michigan State. My guess is you do some hiring and hiring processes.
Yeah, we do lots of hiring. And I mean, to be honest, I am still pretty new here at Michigan State, and so I'm still continuing to learn about the many systems and processes that we have here. But I think what I can speak to is that one of the things I've learned throughout the course of my life, that where this book project really helped me put words to, is that there really is no such thing as a completely bias-free job search process. I think a lot of the mechanisms that we put into place to convince ourselves that something is unbiased still are laden with biases. So, we come up with these rubrics, we come up with these different systems to quote unquote ensure a bias-free process are really, it's really unrealistic, right? To kind of completely isolate and eliminate the implicit biases, as you were saying earlier, Keith, that really exist within ourselves individually, as well as within work environments. And so I think what I've come to learn is that it's really best, as to the extent that we can, to put our individual level and also environmental biases out on the table to address those proactively, right? So if we know that we're currently in an environment, as an example, let's say that values a certain type of dress, right, and a certain type of appearance. I know that there's one chapter in the book that where the authors, actually a couple of authors, reference dress and dress code as an example of fitting into an organization. If we know that that's a bias and something that we value as an organization, that we can have those direct and honest conversations when it comes down to the selection of who we offer that job to. I know that even within this really large organizations, there's also been opportunities for me to engage in more critical conversations about challenging certain processes that we have, and challenging in ways that where we kind of push back when we think we're putting together a process that feels like it may be helpful for a candidate, whereas it may potentially be more harmful, doing more harm than good. And so another example would be processes where we take candidates out to dinner, right? Some employers will choose to take their candidates to dinner either the night of an interview or the night before. And, if we think about the type of tone that sets or the message that it sends, it could potentially do good, yes. And it could also, it sends certain messages about the values of the organization who it represents. So, and there's a lot of opportunity to read into some of those things as a potential employee. And so I think those are some of the ways in which I've kind of enacted that as from the employer's perspective. Real briefly, I'd like to add that from a job seeker perspective, one of the things that I've really gained from this book project is the importance of really developing a sense of agency and being able to be reflective and identify where it is that I hold decision-making opportunities. And so, because really the honest truth is that within job search processes, there's a clear power imbalance, right? Where employers are the ones who have power, and prospective candidates are the ones who are the targets, who are in a targeted position. And so to the extent that I can as a job seeker, I try as much as possible to identify the areas where I do have agency and to be able to act upon that. And so that's one thing that I would encourage for folks to really consider is, especially if you're currently in a job search process right now, think about where it is that you have authority over and control over your own decisions and your own life, and don't always bend to the whim of the employer, right? Like, you have agency, you have authority, and you need to be able to act upon that.
Right. I appreciate that. The big takeaways for me there is that to have a fully perfect process is never going to be possible when you have systems and structures and human beings who are flawed. So how do we hold that and give ourselves some grace while also having high aspirations and not just give up and say, well, it's going to be a mess anyway, so let's just be a mess. But how do we hold ourselves? And I guess my takeaway is, let's just be as transparent as possible about what works, what doesn't work, where things are. And you're giving the example about dinner. Just be transparent about what we're trying to achieve, and is that what's working for you, or do we need to do something different? And I love the nod to agency. How about other ways that you're putting this into practice?
So I would say some of the ways that I've been putting this into practice, and actually, like, Vu, when you were speaking, I was reminded one of the first times we presented on the book together. I won't say any names. We were at a conference. We were debriefing together over lunch. You had attended a different session that was talking about dress, and two of the biggest takeaways for you, Vu, from that session, where they were like, you were feeling a little bit frustrated in how these folks were talking about what dress job seekers should be showing up for interviews at, or even once you have the job. And I looked down and I was wearing the two things that these speakers had named frustrated them. It was never wear sandals and never wear ankle pants. And I was like, oops. So right, and I'm saying that now in this kind of funny way, because it's how do ankle pants and sandals have any type of representation of who somebody is as a human being, as an intellect, as somebody that could contribute positively to your institution? It has no say, but that's all that silly muck that is in a lot of our brains about what it means to be a good worker. So I think that, honestly, dress is one of the biggest ways I still show up and try to challenge. This is also coming from a super privileged place of me being white and me being cisgender. And me already being at the current institution I'm at for about 2 years now, right? But I do try to dress in a manner that I think is actually appropriate for the role that I have, instead of this ideal of what it means to be a worker in the United States, because I think those are two very different things. So I think trying to exercise that agency that Vu is talking about is one of the biggest things that, even as a current employee and being on the employer side, I try to exercise and challenge the systems that are in place. But I think another huge way that I've put this into practice is, while reflecting on my own individual biases, trying to develop a healthy sense of distrust in some of these things that I've coded as truths, if that makes sense. So in our field of student affairs, we are obsessed with personality assessments. We love StrengthsFinder and the MBTI, and you name it, we're doing it. They hold all these values of what it means to build a great cohesive team. I also love podcasts, and so I listen to a lot of really fun podcasts. And one of the most recent ones I listened to kind of smack down the MBTI as this completely not factual thing. And who knows if that's actually true? I'm not sure. But we put a lot of value into these things and try to use them to justify why somebody would or would not fit. And I am guilty of putting that trust in those things. And I think it's another way that I've allowed myself to develop biases against so many folks. So I'm trying to get a healthy sense of distrust in things that I once was taught to not question.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. I've always found it funny that acting professional student affairs people have to go out and buy outfits to interview in. Like, if you were only going to wear that to interview in, why are we wearing suits that we would never wear on campus to interview in? Like, maybe we should wear kind of what we would wear when we're on campus when we're not at the annual cattle calls.
One thing that I would add, so Chapter 5, the No, I Can't Meet You for an $8 coffee. I really took that to heart, and I actually sent that to my program when we were doing my interview process, because I think when I started my program, there were 5 people in my cohort in my PhD program, and 3 of the 5, me not included, have a parent with a PhD and have a lot of financial resources to support them on their journey through a 6-year-long PhD process to become a counseling psychologist. And so when people come and they ask, about the financial aspects, one of the things the book chapter talks about is navigational capital. And it's been interesting seeing my colleagues who come from family of means. I grew up in a single household on government assistance. And I realized, wow, I have a lot of knowledge that I can offer graduate students who are living at the economic margins. We qualify for food assistance through food stamps. I've helped to challenge our program to provide extra information about how to navigate the process of a graduate student by, here's where you can find affordable housing, here's how to apply for food stamps, and to not feel shame about that. It really helped me to engage some of my own internalized classism and realize, hey, this is a strength that I've had, that I had to learn to navigate this, at a young age, and to be very transparent about that with our search processes. And a lot of students who come to our program or ended up going elsewhere have personally thanked me about being so open, say, hey, we're on food stamps and it stinks, and that's the reality, but here's how you can cobble together resources to attain this degree that you want to obtain, that it's not impossible. So I'm really grateful for that chapter, but that's something that I've specifically been trying to do in my work as a result of the book.
Thanks, Elliott. And let's get a shout out to those authors, Sanja Argua and Becky Martinez, for their contribution to that we've referenced a couple of times. Brian, any ways you're putting this into your day-to-day practice?
Yeah, maybe I'll be a little bit more abstract, which this group will know is my my tendency. But
your superpower?
Yeah, it's my superpower. But I think for me, I really strongly believe in the power of language and the power that's in language. And so for me, I think something that this book provided me with through this 5-year process, and that we hope that it provides people with through reading the finished product, is language to talk about this. And I think what's sort of dangerous in a sense about job fit is how elusive it is and how quickly it disappears after we say the word. So we talk about fit and then we move on, and we don't really investigate or talk about what we mean by it. And so this, for me, has provided me with a really strong set of different varying perspectives on how to talk about fit. And so the way that I have really put it into practice is by talking about it and making this a regular part of the conversation that I'm having with my colleagues. I'm in a position of supervising. I've been on 6 search committees in the 2 years I've been at this institution. Hashtag small liberal arts colleges. And so I think, for me, what I go back to is thinking about sort of early on in the project, we had originally thought that we were going to have a series of what we called scholarly contributions and then personal testimonies. And we were, hopefully everybody remembers this, but we were originally going to have actually 2 different calls for content, one call for chapters, one call for testimonies. And what we found as we read through these amazing chapters was that testimonies are part of scholarship. That the narratives that we're telling, our lived experiences, those are examples of scholarship. We build our expertise by living our lives. And so what I love about this book and what it's provided me with is a way to frame my own narrative in an empowering way, so that I feel like Boo was saying, I have agency in places where I never felt like I had agency before. And that's that's like, as a member of a search committee, where I didn't really think it was my place to step up and say something over a committee chair, for example. But when in fact it is my place as a member of that committee to say something or ask a question, like, what did you mean by, what did you mean when you said fit in this instance? And we say fit in lots of different ways, and fit is the word that we chose for the book, but we say that in lots of different ways. And it's our responsibility as members of those communities, when we have built up enough capital to do that, to step in and say something. And what I found challenging before working on this project was not necessarily having the language to talk about it in these contexts. And I'm so grateful for the work of our authors for helping provide us as editors with that language, and hopefully our readers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about not separating out the scholarly from the personal narrative, because that's all of that. And you're giving real depth to Brene Brown saying, stories are just data with a soul. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of soul in this book. I'd love to hear from you all about, obviously we don't want to use fit in a hegemonic way where we're making people become something they're not. And there are organizations where individuals will be better able to thrive than others. There are deal breakers people have based on their identities and their values. And so I've been wrestling that as I've been thinking about this. I've always used the language of fit. I'm totally on board with your critique. I'm ready to give it up, but I'm wondering what to talk about, as I often find myself talking with people who are candidates in multiple processes. Where's a place, and I guess the language I'm using now, and I'd love for you to help me clean this up, is where can I find alignment? Or where's a place where there's good potential for me to find belonging, right? And so I'd love to hear, I know you all have been in conversations. How would you encourage both candidates and organizations who are looking to bring people in? Because we don't want to set people up to be miserable, to not be able to be successful. That's not good for them. It's not good for the organization that then spends time training them and then in 6 months is doing another search. So how do we do this alignment or finding places where belonging is possible without getting into the damaging, making people fit thing? Maybe can we start with Vu on this? You look eager.
Yeah, I am. I'm reflecting on one of the pieces of consideration that we were invited to really ponder over and challenge ourselves with as editors in our book development process. One of the pieces of feedback we got was that job fit can be a good thing. We, in our quest to be critical of job fit and look at job fit through this critical lens, it led us down lots of really valuable paths of unearthing past historical inequities and marginalization of different communities. It also maybe pushed us too far, where we lost perspective on all the positive benefits of why job fit exists and the motivations for why individuals and employers and organizations may want to and feel some need to integrate this alignment or whatever it is that we want to call it, right? I know that Brian made a comment earlier about being so sensitive to the concept of job fit, where we went out of our way to try to find other words to describe fit or alignment without using the word job fit. But I think there still is value in talking about job fit and using that as a way of framing alignment, whether that may be alignment of values or environment or person to person. I think for me, it comes back to fit is being a tool, right? The word itself and the concept itself is a tool, and any tool can be used for its appropriate purpose, or it could be misused and can create harm for folks. And so I think what I would advocate for is a more mindful and conscious approach to using fit. I think that I hope that one of the things that this book project pushes people to do is to use it as an uncontested term and to assume that we all know what we're talking about when we're talking about this person being a great fit in our organization.
Yeah. I love that of interrogating it, of being conscious of it. Daniel Ostick on Twitter saying that he always wants people to, if they're going to use the fit, explore what that means. So when we're saying fit, what are we meaning? And I think that's really hard because I might be unconscious, not aware, not just not wanting to say it out loud, but I may not have an idea about what that is. Gabby, what suggestions would you have?
So, Vu, everything that you said about fit being a tool, I could not echo louder. And I hope that resonated with folks the same way it's resonating with me. And then in addition to that, I think regardless of whether you are on the hiring manager side, on the job seeker side, or whether this is just your normal day-to-day at work, if you are in a position where you've got maybe, let's say, the dominant identity of what is either being critiqued or talked about, or you just have a lot of privileged identities. If you're feeling uncomfortable by change that's happening, by conversation that's occurring, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, because progress might be happening that might be allowing folks that have not been able to experience a sense of belonging in the workplace prior to that. It might mean that progress is actually finally taking shape. I think something that has evolved with me around job fit is a sense of, for folks to be able to experience alignment and belonging in a positive sense, it inherently means that some of us are going to need to get really uncomfortable, and that's not a bad thing. Any type of growth comes with discomfort. So leaning into that discomfort is so incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And one of our folks on Twitter, Allie Triggs, perhaps, not sure what your full name is, say, I love the phrasing of this. There's also still value in positive experiences that bloom from gathering a sense of belonging. And I think that's when people say there's value in fit, that's what they're talking about, right? Or intending to talking about, or aspiring to talk about. And I love Gabby's nudge that if it feels uncomfortable in your dominance, that's probably great. And how do you be in that, which is harder to do. Elliott, how about you? What suggestions are you've already talked about some of the ways you're doing this in terms of candidates coming in for doctoral programs and other things. What ways would you suggest that folks navigate some of this?
Yeah, I really love, as someone who does therapy now, I really love what Gabby said about growth comes from discomfort. I always tell my therapy clients that. So I definitely encourage that. But something that comes to mind too is and it was a social justice educator, because I do intergroup dialogue on my campus, is that we're asking our students to lean into that discomfort, to grapple with how their privilege has prevented them from learning. I think we have to do that ourselves too in this process, right? It's how can we, on one hand, ask our students to do this in these educational environments and yet not take it back and self-reflect in the same way? I think that's great. If you love someone and you connect with them on an interview, never assume that person won't accept the job because others have come and gone. We can't just assume that a person won't be happy in the job or won't be happy in this location simply based upon our fear that they may leave because there's not a lot of folks that share their identity there. I think if you can't even imagine a liberatory space where you can change the environment, you're preventing that person from making the decision for themselves. And there's a lot of power in that quick thought of, oh, they probably won't accept the offer because X. And the question that I would ask us to do is, why do you personally feel that way? And really, what are the emotions that come up when we and the authors are asking you to challenge that question? Where is that coming from? I think that mindful awareness of that emotional reaction is really important. Maybe that sounds too much to therapist, but I think those things are important because those emotions play into how we're making the decision. So I think that's what I'd ask you to do, is to engage in some self-reflection as the process happens.
Yeah. Well, and you're pointing to those emotions are often an indicator of deeper things going on. I might have just a gut level response because this person looks a lot like the person who bullied me in high school. And that's not fair to them. Or this puts it into the way they're describing this, uses language similar to someone who was really great to me and I was an amazing mentor. And so I elevate them, right? And so how do we pay attention to those kind of emotions and then unpack what may be underneath them and influencing some of that? How about you, Brian? We'll return to, before we turn to some final words of wisdom from all four of you, Brian, do you have other suggestions or tips you find yourself sharing on these 6 search committees you've been on, or to candidates navigating these different processes?
Yeah, well, and Elliott, what you said just really resonated with me and my experience on some really great search committees this year, where we had some challenging conversations around those very questions of like, will they be happy here? I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere in New York. It's a very rural, very white area. We're a very privileged institution, and so there's sort of a profile. But we've had some really great conversations about that, and we've actually built into our hiring process to talk about that with search committees before they go making those assumptions, which I think is really, really positive. So I think that's sort of one suggestion, is to really think about the kind of training you're providing to people making hiring decisions. And that's brought up in many different chapters. And also, I think giving, like, just be open and honest with people, especially when you're, I think on both ends, but it's easier to be honest when you're in power. So the hiring manager or search committee, being forthright about, like, we tell people when they're coming here what they're walking into, even though it's kind of obvious when you step onto our campus. We want them to know what it is that we're working on, what we're not necessarily working on yet, but would like to, and the challenges that people face. But then we also, behind the scenes, connect people or try to ask them if they want to be connected to people with identities that are similar to theirs, to talk about what it's like in a way that's not going to get back to the search committee or anyone making a decision. So a confidential connection to another person of color on campus who can talk to their experience. Now that, in a way that's not sort of stereotyping them into that their experience is the only experience that a person of color could have, but really just talking generally about what they might expect, how far they might have to drive to get the hair products that they want to get, and things like that. And it sort of reminds me of a story that I tell in the first chapter around a supervisor that I had during the search process, who basically said, I see social justice a lot on your resume, and I just want you to know that we're not very good at social justice here, at least not yet. And I remember sort of having this moment of like, is this person challenging me in this moment, or are they just being honest? And I decided to accept it as being honest, and I think I was right in the end. And so I was able to step onto that campus knowing what it is that I was walking into, and already accepting the challenge of wanting to make it a more socially just environment and to advocate for liberatory practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great suggestions about, again, this thing keeps coming up for many of you about, let's just be transparent with ourselves. Let's be transparent about our language. Let's be transparent about where we got things together and where we're a work in progress and where we haven't even gotten to that yet. I often tell people who are struggling in their current role and they fall in love with a job posting from somewhere and imagine everything's perfect there, and everybody has every place has its challenges. Every place has its works. You know what the ones at your current institution are, but if you think that the next job is going to be this place without any challenges or difficulties, that's just unrealistic. Make sure you know what they are and know what your deal breakers are. Like, these challenges and difficulties are undesirable. I can navigate that. These, I just personally, I can't deal with that. And so what are your deal breakers? How do you know that and ask the question so you can navigate that? We've got just a few minutes before we need to wrap up. I'd love just a quick round of just 1 or 2 real great nuggets of wisdom that you want to offer, or maybe you've gotten from this process of working on this project over 5 years.
So I am thinking about those moments in my early career as a graduate student and as a brand new professional to the field full time, where I feel like I get our version of the conversation from our mentors, where it's about, find the job that's best fit for you. I feel like it's a very common conversation that happens between mentors in very well-meaning ways to help guide our new professionals. And so I guess my message is for folks who are in that position where you are providing coaching and guidance and transferring knowledge to the next generation of professionals, is to really interrogate the spirit of job fit in itself. And when you're providing that advice to the next generation of professionalized, be more clear and explicit about what you mean when you use fit, because it's going to get integrated in, internalized and interpreted in a certain way. And I think that's one opportunity for us to potentially interrupt some of the cyclical conceptions of job fit that have led us to where we are today.
Thank you.
So I think I can share. I'm also just feeling really thankful for this conversation today. I mean, as Brian kind of talked about our origin story, if you will, and how I joined the team, I'm just reminded of how long we worked, but how amazing those conversations were, every single Sunday morning, early afternoon, as we were really growing this from the ground up. And I think that is my first takeaway. So as Brian said, I joined the team as an intern through the Commission for Social Justice Educators. I wasn't originally a part of the editorial team. It's just something that kind of happened naturally. So to younger professionals that might be listening today, I would say don't say yes to any opportunity that you feel excited about. I was so excited about the work that these three were doing, in conjunction with the folks that they were having those original conversations with. And I was lucky enough to have the ability and the time outside of my full-time job to just kind of dive into it. And it led to getting to be able to work with some of the most brilliant scholars. I mean, I'm a little bit biased because I was a part of this project, but we worked with brilliant authors. And I never would have had that opportunity if I just hadn't kind of taken a chance and thrown my name into the hat to be a part of the intern. So say yes to those opportunities that are exciting to you, because who knows what they could lead to. And then the other thing that I would say, I know we've mentioned it time and time and time again, but keep reflecting, right? Keep reflecting on what you are even able to identify as your individual biases, but also ask folks for feedback on it. I mean, I've shared this book with friends of mine that aren't even in the field of higher education, and they're taking something away from it. And it's allowed us to have these really lovely conversations about all of our hidden baggage that we're carrying with us that are causing us to cast judgments on others inside and outside of the workplace. And I just think it's so important to keep finding really unique and refreshing ways to have the conversations where we reflect on our biases.
Thank you. Brian and Elliott, any quick last-minute words of wisdom?
I would be humbled by the representation of authors, as far as some folks were still graduate students when we started this process. Some are senior professionals that have name recognition. And I want everyone to know that they are a scholar and that you don't have to have a certain level of degree or years of experience to have something vitally important that can disrupt the norms. And I really feel like the author did that. So you have something important to say, so say it. And at least I want to hear. I think we want to hear that too.
Thanks, Elliott.
I think the only thing that I have to add, because those are really great sort of ways to finish up this conversation, is just sort of the feeling that I've had in the 5 years of working on this with this really amazing group of people, and the fantastic authors who just worked so hard and taught me so much, is that you're not doing it alone. We're all experiencing what it's like to not fit in our own ways, and that we need to talk about that. And that and again, I think it's the power of language. I think by talking about it with each other, we both give ourselves power, and we take away the power of the systems and structures that seek to keep us down and keep us behind the curtain. So you're not alone. And I hope that people will read this book and take away some really amazing stories that help them feel connected.
Well, thanks all of you so much. It's also really gratifying for me personally as someone who was part of the group who helped work to create the Commission for Social Justice Educators about 15 years ago, or maybe more, to see what has come from that group and that entity. And this is just one of the wonderful gems that has emerged from great people coming together and doing great thinking. So that is a treat to see. I am grateful for all of you for your time as panelists today. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your insight, and sharing the brilliance of the authors. And thanks to the great work of our producers and Brian behind the scenes. You can receive reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to the HigherEdLive newsletter or browse our archives at higheredlive.com. Join us for my next episode, which will be July 10th, for a rescheduled conversation with Dan Tillapa and Brian McGowan on men and masculinities. And on July 24th, for a discussion on leading with a racial and social justice lens for senior student affairs officers with Jacob Diaz, Robin Holmes Sullivan, Patty Perillo, Jamie Washington, and Kent Porterfield. Again, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Thanks again to our fabulous guests today, and to everyone who is watching. Please make it a great week. Thank you all.
Thank you.